Well, this talk is going to be a bit wider than the Schengen Agreement, but the Schengen is going to be about migration and the EU. So, not a contentious subject. So I will attempt to cover freedom of movement within the EU, the management of non-EU nationals wishing to enter the EU, and the access of EU migrants to the UK benefit system. Finally, since migrant is a name we give some of our fellow human beings, I will look at what I call two stories, illustrating a need to look more closely at what goes on underneath the surface of the statistics and the various rules and regulations. Migration, and particularly migration statistics, is a minefield. Consequently, I will use as few figures as possible. But first, the global context. In 2015, the number of international migrants worldwide, that is, people residing in a country other than the country of their birth, was the highest ever recorded, having reached 244 million. As a share of the world population, however, international migration has remained fairly constant over the past decades, at around 3%. In the first decade of this century, the two biggest migration flows did not involve Europe at all. They were mainly economic migration from Mexico to the United States and from the Indian subcontinent to the Gulf states. Freedom of movement in the EU. Along with the other freedoms of movement, goods, services, capital, the free movement of persons is one of the cornerstones of EU integration and has been since its inception in the 1950s. For persons, this freedom is limited to the right to cross borders for the purpose of work. The goal is both political and economic. Allowing workers to move freely within the community should enhance economic efficiency by allowing workers to find the jobs that best suit their skills and experience, while simultaneously allowing firms to hire the most appropriate workers. On a political level, the architects of the EU hoped that mobility would foster mutual understanding among the peoples of Europe. How do EU citizens move from member state to member state? That's within the EU. All EU citizens have the right to enter another member state by virtue of having an identity card or a passport. Under no circumstances can an entry or an exit visa be required. For stays of less than 3 months, the only requirement on EU citizens is that they possess a valid identity document or passport. The host member of state may require the persons concerned to register their presence in the country within a reasonable and non-discriminatory period of time. The right of residence for more than 3 months is subject to certain conditions. Applicants must either 1. Be engaged in economic activity on an employed or self-employed basis, or 2. Have sufficient resources and sick insurance to ensure that they do not become a burden on the social services of the host member state during their stay. The member state may not specify a minimum amount which they deem sufficient, but they must take account of personal circumstances. 3, they can be following vocational training as a student, but again they must have sufficient resources and sickness insurance, etc. Or 4, be a family member of an EU citizen who falls into one of the categories I have mentioned. A member of family refers to spouse, direct descendants under 21 years of age, and dependent direct, ascendants, my father, grandfather, etc. EU citizens acquire the right of permanent residence in the host member state after a 5-year period of uninterrupted legal residence, provided that an expulsion order has not been enforced against them. EU citizens or members of their family may be expelled from the host member state on grounds of public policy, public security, or public health. Under no circumstances may an expulsion decision be taken on economic grounds. Expulsion is seen as a very considerable interference in a person's life, so when it comes to public policy and public security, sanctions taken on these grounds must be proportionate and based exclusively on the personal conduct of the individual concerned, which must represent a genuine, present, and sufficiently serious threat affecting one of the fundamental interests of society. During the 1980s, a debate began over the meaning of free movement of persons in Europe. Some member states felt the concept should apply to EU citizens only, which would involve keeping internal border checks in order to distinguish between EU citizens and non-EU nationals. Others argued in favour of free movement for everyone, which would mean an end to internal border checks altogether. Since member states could not reach agreement, France, Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg and the Netherlands decided in 1985 to create a territory without internal borders. This became known as the Schengen area after the town in Luxembourg where the first agreements were signed. An agreement finally took effect 10 years later in 1995 and abolished checks at internal borders of the signatory states and created a single external border where immigration checks for the Schengen area are carried out in accordance with identical procedures. In order to reconcile freedom of movement with security, this freedom of movement was accompanied by so-called compensatory measures. This involved improving cooperation and coordination between the police and judicial authorities in order to safeguard internal security, and in particular to fight organised crime. With this in mind, the Schengen Information System was set up. This is a sophisticated database used by authorities of the Schengen member countries to exchange data on certain categories of peoples and goods. The Schengen area gradually expanded to include other member states and also Norway, Switzerland and Iceland. Currently, EU states that do not belong to the Schengen area are UK, Ireland, Croatia, Cyprus, Romania and Bulgaria. In March 1999, the United Kingdom asked to cooperate in some aspects of Schengen, namely police and judicial cooperation in criminal matters, the fight against drugs and counter-terrorism, and this request was granted in 2000. The 13th of November Paris attacks prompted an urgent rethink of the Schengen Agreement. There was alarm that killers had so easily slipped into Paris from Belgium, and that some had entered the EU with crowds of migrants via Greece. As a result, one after another, EU states reimposed temporary border controls. In December, the European Commission proposed a major amendment to Schengen, expected to become law soon. Most non-EU travellers have their details checked against police databases at the EU's external borders. The main change is that the rule will now apply to EU citizens as well, who until now had been exempt. Non-EU nationals who have a Schengen visa generally do not have ID checks once they are travelling inside the zone. But since the Paris atrocity, those checks have become more common. How do non-EU citizens enter into EU member states? Each EU country alone decides, one, the total number of migrants that can be admitted to the country to look for work. They decide all final decisions on migrant applications. They decide on the rules for long-term visas, stays of periods longer than 3 months, and finally, conditions to obtain residence and work permits when no EU-wide rules have been adopted. EU-wide immigration rules generally apply in 24 out of the EU's 27 countries. The UK, Ireland and Denmark are the exceptions. The UK introduced tougher new rules for non-EU citizens in 2012, and there have been many detailed changes since. In 2004, an agency of the EU was set up called Frontex to manage the cooperation between national border guards securing its external borders. Frontex plans, coordinates and implements joint operations across the EU's air, land and sea borders, carries out risk analysis and research, provides rapid response capabilities through a European border team, and assists member states in the return of foreign nationals. The UK has observer status on the Frontex Management Board. Access to UK benefits for migrants from EU countries. Many people are concerned about EU migrants claiming benefits in the UK, in particular what has become known as benefit tourism. In many European countries, there has been a clampdown on this, and the UK is no exception. Here's an extract from a Department of Work and Pensions press release in March 2015, which summarises some of the main features. This government has introduced a number of measures to make sure the benefit and tax credit system for EU migrants is increasingly focused only on those who contribute through work. 1. All EU job seekers need to live in the country for at least 3 months before they can claim income-based job seekers allowance, child benefit and child tax credit. 2. After 3 months, job seekers have to take a stronger, more robust habitual residence test if they want to claim income-based job seekers allowance. 3. After 3 months on job seekers allowance, they have a genuine prospect of work test. If they do not have an imminent job offer, they will lose their benefits and their right to reside in the UK as a job seeker. Fourthly, new migrant job seekers from the EU are no longer able to claim housing benefits. So it's very, just a sample of some of the new arrangements. As I said at the beginning, migrants, of course, are fellow human beings, and the way they interact with all these rules and regulations varies according to time and place. Here are 2 examples of what has or is going on underneath the statistics. The Polish story. The latest figures from the Office of National Statistics, analysing UK population by country of birth, shows that in 2014, the largest ethnic population, at 793,000, was born in India. Following very close behind, at 790,000, that's 3,000 less, were those born in Poland. By now they may well have overtaken those born in India. And third position were people born in Pakistan, of which there were just over 500,000. A Polish presence in the UK population existed before 2004, when Poland became part of the EU, and this helped to create networks and contacts between the diaspora and those back home. The 1951 UK census recorded 152,000 people born in Poland, a hangover from the Second World War. By 2001, that number had shrunk to 58,000. So why did so many Poles leave Poland and find their way to the UK after 2004, when Poland officially joined the EU? Here are a few of the factors at play. 1. The entry of baby boomers into Poland's labour market around the date of accession to the EU. Between 2002 and 2007, the Polish labour market had to face the arrival of people born in the period from 1979 to 1984. In that 6-year period, the number of births was over 300,000 higher than the previous 6-year period. Moreover, these baby boomers were as a rule better educated, and their occupational aspirations were higher than the general economically active population. Parallel to this boom, there was a significant improvement in the learning of foreign languages, particularly English and German. At that time, entry of young people into the Polish labour market was very difficult. Under communism, there had been much overstaffing in many areas of the economy. As a result of the post-communist restructuring of the economy, many jobs were lost, and by 2004, over 40% of those under 25 were unemployed. There was a particular lack of job opportunities for women. Second factor, the UK's initial decision to open its borders was based in 2004, when Poland joined the EU, was based on a view that to do so was a solution to an increasingly publicised shortages of both skilled labour, particularly in construction, and lower skilled labour, especially in agriculture and hospitality. Some of the shortages were due to a perceived reluctance on the part of domestic workers to undertake many of the available jobs at the wages on offer. When the UK made its initial decision, it was not known that only 2 other countries, Ireland and Sweden, would open their borders immediately. Other EU members preferred to introduce a transition period. As by far the largest market of the 3 opening up the borders, the UK became the main target destination. Thirdly, perceptions. Viewed by a typical economically active person in 2004, Poland's economic situation seemed much less favourable than that of the UK, which was generally richer and its social institutions more highly developed. Life in Britain was perceived to be easier and of higher quality. Although many migrants failed and returned, the prevalent message sent to relatives and friends was of success. There was even a TV drama series called The Londoners, which had its debut on the main public TV channel in Poland in October 2008 and was watched on average by more than 3 million people. Although particular episodes focused on hardships, interpersonal relationships and even crime, the series painted life in London as colourful and manageable for all, irrespective of their social background and past experience. Within a relatively short time, Britain, and especially London, became well known to Polish public opinion, better than any other place outside Poland. Finally, the Fenland story. The town of Wisbech is known as the capital of the Fens, the fertile flatlands of East Anglia, which produce more than 1/3 of the UK's vegetables. The population of Wisbech is currently about 30,000, 10,000 of which are thought to be recently arrived foreigners. Inhabitants say they no longer feel safe or at home in their own town. Almost certainly the great majority will be voting leave, and it's easy to understand why. But why are there so many foreign nationals in Wisbech? The constant just-in-time replenishment of goods at the heart of today's retail and manufacturing business models requires an equally constant replenishment of workers ordered at short notice. To turn labour on and off like a tap, you need a surplus, just waiting for the late-night text, desperate enough to take 12 hours work one day and nothing the next. The pool has itself required an equally constant replenishment with new arrivals of changing nationalities in repeated waves of immigration, since only the newly arrived or the vulnerable will put up with the conditions. From the late 1980s on, new technology allowed employers to eliminate much of the financial risk from their end of the chain. Supermarkets, for example, only reorder stock when a customer buys an item and its barcode is scanned, generating an instruction to their suppliers to replace it by the next day. Orders can double or half within 24 hours, so workers to process and pack the goods are called in at short notice. This reduces costs and increases profits, since businesses no longer have to keep inventory or pay for full-time employment. Instead, they have outsourced labour provision to agents or gangmasters. Agriculture and food processing pioneered this lean approach to business, but its zero-hours practices have spread to other sectors, to care homes, catering and food service, hotel work, cleaning, construction, and some personal services. In recent years, gangmasters have recruited flexible labour from the poorest rural areas of the former Soviet bloc. Currently, it is Latvian, Lithuanian, and ethnic Russian migrant workers who are desperate enough to endure the low pay and long hours. Lured by the promise of good work, often speaking no English, they have been easy to exploit. Many of the migrant workers are paid less than the legal minimum for illegally extended shifts without breaks. It falls to Her Majesty's Revenue and Custom to enforce not just tax, but the legal minimum wage. But HMRC has only around 150 national minimum wage inspectors for the whole country. According to the Government's Migration Advisory Committee, this means that the average business, statistically, should expect a visit from an inspector every 250 years. Unions that might have once overseen conditions in the fields and factories in the past are in decline. The Gangmasters Licensing Authority has lost staff, having had its budget cut by 20% over the course of the last Parliament. So I hope that those two examples just highlight the importance of understanding what is happening and why beyond the bare headline statistics.